What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video here on the World of Sports podcast. I'm your host, Deegs, and on today's show, we're going to be talking about some pretty big football news that just went down. Chiefs cornerback Marcus Peters has been traded to the Rams. The details for this trade have not been revealed yet. I would expect it to be potentially a first or a second round pick. If it's not, then I don't know what the Chiefs are doing, but we're going to kind of break down how this affects the Rams in the future, talk about Marcus Peters as a player overall, and what the Rams will do this offseason surrounding this Marcus Peters move. So just talking about Marcus Peters real quick, he was the best Chiefs corner last year, and it wasn't even close. Their secondary, after losing Eric Berry, was pretty much decimated, and it was only good, and the numbers aren't relatively awful because Marcus Peters was there. He's Pro Football Focus's number 17 overall corner last season, grading out with an 85.7. Peters plays well in both man and zone coverage. He shadows receivers, meaning he doesn't stay on one side of the field. Sometimes we'll see him line up on multiple sides of the field just to be able to go up against the guy he's assigned to. And to me, he's one of the best overall and well-rounded corners in football. So looking at the Rams cornerbacks last season, you have their number one corner in Tremaine Johnson, who is an unrestricted free agent this season. Then you have Kayvon Webster, their number two corner, who is recovering from an Achilles tear. We don't know when he'll be back, although he's expected to be back by the time the season starts. You have Nicole Roby-Coleman, who is an unrestricted free agent, good cornerback depth for them. And then you have Troy Hill, who filled in for Webster and is under team control. So, some things the Rams might do surrounding this Marcus Peters move is the first thing, I do believe they're going to re-sign Nicole Roby-Coleman just because cornerback depth is never really a bad thing to have in the NFL nowadays. And they should and will retain either Tremaine Johnson or LaMarcus Joyner. So before this move went down, the Rams were either going to franchise tag Tremaine Johnson, which would be, I think, somewhere around $12 or $13 million a year, or sign him to the contract he wants. Now, because they have a true number one corner in Marcus Peters, and he's an upgrade over Tremaine Johnson, I don't think they'll they won't lose anything by letting Johnson walk. I mean, they will because he's a fantastic corner, but they're not going to lose that number one guy that can go up against other teams' best receivers because they have Marcus Peters. So I would not expect them to franchise tag Johnson or even pay him. I do believe he'll be let go, or not let go, but left alone by the Rams, and they won't try to re-sign him. Then you have LaMarcus Joyner, who was one of the best free safeties in football last year. I do believe he was Pro Football Focus as number 5 overall safety. Joyner could potentially get franchise tagged. I don't think he will. So it's either going to be they're going to let him go or they're going to pay him a ton of money. He's going to command a lot of money on the open market because he is the best safety in this free agent class. I'm sorry. So that's something the Rams will definitely have to consider. Then if you go to the offensive side of the ball, something that does affect the defense, the Rams in previous reports have actually spoken about franchise tagging wide receiver Sammy Watkins. But if they do that, that would mean that they would not be able to place a franchise tag on either LaMarcus Joyner or Tremaine Johnson because they'd be paying Watkins under that tag. So I think that it would be a smarter move for the Rams to actually sign Watkins to a one-year deal. It would be a cheaper move, and then if they need to, use the franchise tag on either LaMarcus Joyner or Tremaine Johnson. Assuming that they don't trade their first-round pick to the Chiefs in this deal, which I think they might, they could draft a corner in the first round. Some guys that could be there, Isaiah Oliver out of Colorado, he's a pretty good guy. You have Jair Alexander from Louisville, considered one of the best corners in the draft class before playing this year with a knee injury. I think Jair Alexander is an absolute monster. And then you have that big physical 6'1", 6'2" Auburn corner in Carlton Davis, who pretty much anchored that secondary for all of last season. So what do I think the Rams will do? I think that they'll actually sign Sammy Watkins to maybe a 1 or 2 year prove-it deal because even though Watkins caught a lot of touchdowns last year, he really wasn't that efficient and or effective. He only had 39 receptions, so that's not really good from a guy who was one point considered to be a true number one receiver. I do think they'll sign Nicole Roby-Coleman, for corner depth. He's kind of a guy who could play in the slot, and I do really think that if they keep him and you put Marcus Peters and the guy and another true corner over there next to him, that could be something nice. They're going to tag LaMarcus Joyner, in my opinion. LaMarcus Joyner is way too valuable to the secondary for them to let him walk. He's going to command a lot of money, so I don't think they will, sign him to a big contract. They'll tag him, see what he can do, and then next season, if he is the same safety he was this year, I do think that they will end up locking him up. This unfortunately means that Tremaine Johnson walks, which really isn't that bad because this is a guy who, according to Pro Football Focus and other websites, depending on where you want to look at football grades, he really doesn't grade out well. The eye test is there. He's a good athletic corner, but I think that he's overpricing himself, and I know all athletes overprice themselves, but he's kind of going above and beyond, and expecting to get paid more than he deserves. So really, I think the smart move for the Rams would be to sign Nickell Roby-Coleman, tag LaMarcus Joyner, bring back Watkins, and let Johnson walk because they have Marcus Peters now. I do think the Rams will draft an edge rusher in the first round, which is kind of confusing because I haven't really talked about that. But if you look at this draft class this year, there's a lot of solid corners that could potentially fall into the second round. Like I talked about earlier, Isaiah Oliver, Jair Alexander, Carlton Davis, all those guys could potentially end up falling into the second round. So I don't think it'll harm the Rams to wait later on to draft a guy like that. But if you look at the edge rushers in this class and the premier edge rushers like Deron Payne, not edge rusher necessarily, but pass rushers, you have Deron Payne, Vita Vea, Harold Landry, Marcus Davenport, those guys, to draft a true pass rusher is a much more luxurious pick, and it has a lot less depth in this class than corners do. So I think the Rams, if they do retain their first round pick, will end up we'll end up drafting an edge rusher with their first round pick and waiting on into the later rounds to draft a corner. If they get rid of this first round pick, you could see them potentially try and move up, or they'll definitely go with corner in the second round because I don't think an edge rusher of high quality will be there in the second round. You know, if you didn't watch football last season, the Rams had the best offense in the league. They averaged the most points per game, and I don't think that will change in this upcoming season. They are a phenomenal offense. Todd Gurley's a monster. Jared Goff is finally, growing into that quarterback that people wanted to see him be, and their head coach is an absolute genius. So the offensive side is fine for the Rams, but other than Aaron Donald, I don't really think there's a true, really good player on this defense. So I think bringing in Marcus Peters does bolster that. He's a really good player and one of the best corners in the entire NFL. So the key for the Rams here is to build their defense up to being to being good enough to the point where they can support that themselves without needing help from their offense. Obviously, their defensive coordinator is a genius, but I think that if the Rams are able to have an above-average defense with the kind of offense they have, you could see them really take that leap and turn into legitimate Super Bowl contenders even as early as next season. So that's all I have for you guys today. Thanks again for watching. If you enjoyed this video, drop a like and subscribe. Make sure you follow us on Twitter and our brand new Facebook page. Both will be in the description below, and have a good one.